Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another live stream. And today we're going to go over a few creative updates, development updates, and touching on an important topic for keeping the community engaged. So if you haven't seen our updates before, I'm going to give a short recap. Fracture Online was originally developed by Dynamite Studios and recently acquired by Happy Cauldron Games. And so we're revitalizing and rebooting the Fractured Online IP. And many things are changing because of that. One of those being how we communicate and make these live streams, how we show development updates, and collect feedback from everyone. So to start off, we can hop right into the creative updates. I do want to say that we will have consistent updates every week. Typically that's on the Tuesday. And we're going to get better about all of the socials and events so that everyone can be up to date. But you can pretty much expect every Tuesday, roughly around this same time, and we'll make announcements sooner than a day before next time. But we will have at least a Q&A, and then at least every other 2 weeks, a development update around one of the three kind of pillars of game development. So every week there'll be a little bit light but consistent. And yeah, so keep providing feedback in the chat, and we'll have other ways to collect that feedback. So moving forward, we can go and hop right into some of the creative updates. So to start with, we are continuing to work down the asset pipeline for the Kickstarter armors, as that's one of the most time-consuming and development consuming part of the Kickstarter. So every week we're going to continue to show more progress around the things that a lot of backers already bought many years ago. So to continue from last week, and we'll probably put out a separate video that just does a state of the Kickstarter rewards. We have finished the line art for the High Druid armor. And it is definitely very inspired by, druidic type of pieces, bones, leather, like very nature like. And you'll see the logo on the back of the cape. Those are just, what I'd say is attempts at understanding what a design pattern could look like on the back of a cape. Another thing, I am monitoring chat as well, so please post questions. The next is the Warlord armor. This is one of my favorites so far out of the concept art for the Kickstarter armors. But as you can tell, definitely more savage, more torn apart, brutal type theme going on. Red, very battle-like. And then the King armor. And the King armor is very regal, adorned with cloth capes, very clean armor, very royal blue type colors. Any interesting things from the armor sets we will continue to highlight and show. One of the things that I'm surprised I haven't had more questions on is honestly the capes side of it. A long time ago there was a video of capes. Capes kind of made its way a little bit into the game and then went away for a long time. But when we look at the armors for the Kickstarter, these will be costumes, so they'll be a full set, and they will apply over your existing armor. And with that, it will have, the clothing component of that, the cloak. So we are working through right now the development, pieces of supporting robes and, hanging cloth. If you look in the existing Fractured Online, very little cloth exists to have any of those physics for performance sake, because they also have to be animated if it's not natural like clothing physics, which takes a resource consumption on the machine. So going forward, we're already putting that into the foundation so that we can support cloth or cloth-like physics. One of the updates I did want to show, well, it's not a Kickstarter, it is an armor update. So we've been progressively working through what is that style along with our environment. What is that new Fractured Online look from a armor piece, weapon piece, and environment. And so here is one of the versions for the update to the Slayer armor. Quite a bit more spiky, which has been kind of the theme of the Slayer armor for a long time. A lot more detailed and very little leather accents going through that. But we are iterating on many of these. So one of the things that would be helpful is to understand, feedback around what armor sets in the existing Fractured Online did everyone like the most, and we can prioritize that in the kind of redesign of it. These assets are being reused and updated, but we have a host of armors that we plan to create going forward. A lot more thematic, some tied in with gods, some tied in with the new kind of classes. But overall, there's quite a visual fidelity upgrade. Now, it being a top-down game, you can lose a lot of that identity that comes from having the high fidelity armor, but there's plenty of areas in which you can either zoom in or on your inventory screen or in your character creation or character select. Like, you do get to see these things. It does matter, being a player myself, that my character looks good, especially if I end up, with any Kickstarter skins or, cash shop skins. Then moving on to, the foundational updates. So we had shown in the last live stream the male human model and the iteration that we have on it, on taking a new approach to the way that the human looks. In this case, we've done the same to the female side. So 2 weeks ago, we had shown the first version of the male, and in this case, with 3 hairstyles, and in this case, this is the female. And we've also iterated a little bit on the assassin armor set, but you can see that we've kept that same slightly stylized, or in this case, the actual character itself is pretty stylized. And then the hair itself is quite animated compared to the existing Fractured Online. We've actually taken the cowl or scarf, the cloth off of it, and you can start to see a little bit more of the texturing around the character's model. And this goes back to, your character in MMOs is your identity virtually, and you want to be able to customize and make that look good. So one of the things that we are working through is the facial variations for the human, male and female, along with many hair options, and for the male, facial options as well, like a facial hair. So as we continue to develop those, we'll keep updating them every week or 2 weeks as those assets continue to be created. But they are, completely new assets. So there was a question, are cosmetics going to be obtainable in-game or only from Cash Shop? So that is a good question. When we are still working on the monetization. I know I've said that quite a few times already, but it is a very sensitive subject, and you can really only get it done right once. Any changes after launch typically is not well received. There are going to be plenty of armor options inside of the game to craft, and the cosmetics in the Cash Shop will have its own talk on how you get currency, etc. But I'm very much a big fan of the old traditional subscription methods where everything was just in the game and you didn't have to worry about a Cash Shop. Fortunately, the world has changed quite a bit around that. But for us, having the ability to not pay anything and still get that identity that you want from your character visually is very important. I've always hated games that would intentionally dull down the design of armors that you would get in the game just to then better promote and sell the flashy armor in the cash shop. That's not a method that we want to go with. The cash shop, in our minds, as it stands, is going to be an extension of optionality, or maybe better like tailoring to a specific look that you want in there. But you should still be able to look just as, cool or awesome in your in-game armor as well as a costume. And then moving on to development updates. Today's video is and live stream is going to be pretty short depending on the question and answers. We've made tremendous progress, but some of these things are a little hard to show until some of the graphics are done. And then the other aspect is the designs. So we've spent, every day working through a lot of what the redesigns for Fracture Online will have. And so there will be another video just dedicated around milestones. And I mentioned this in the last video, but we are going to be involving the community in the milestones for development a lot more granular than you're used to seeing from development. And right now I'm working through turning that into a public place that you can go look, whether it's on our website or something like a public Notion, figuring that detail out so that we can best communicate the constant development of these different milestones. And an example of, some of these milestones can be, like progression in combat. So kind of in the phase 1. And then underneath that, there's a lot of higher level milestones like character creation, core character progression redesign, the new class and skill system I'll talk a little bit about, input and combat redesign. And so we're going through each of those aspects that we have to finish development on for us to call it like relaunch ready. And each of the different pillars that makes up the game, from gathering and crafting, personal housing, cities and nodes, social elements, monetization, the season system, PvP, we'll have a series of those. Right now we're just working on turning those into more community-friendly milestones, and then the goals and details around those. These are things that we've talked about, made decisions on. We're just working on making that available to everyone. Let me check chat real quick. So Sinpunk, thank you for joining and playing. So the question is, I would like to know if there is a possibility of returning to the first map that enchanted everyone in the past. And I assume that you're talking about Mir, which was the first kind of in the beta test way back. And some of the things that made Mir stick out in everyone's mind, at least from analyzing Mir. I actually did not play Fracture Online during the Mir times, but we looked through Mir and looked through videos and feedback, and we wanted to understand what was it about Mir that people really liked. As there were, from a development standpoint, there was a lot of things that they wanted to move away from. The players really wanted certain things, and at its core, and do put in chat if I'm not catching the right things that you saw that you liked about Mir. But there was a different world design around Mir that RN and Terra did not have. And that really came from two things. The world's environment was able to show scale differently. In fact, I remember distinctly there was a video of someone running across a bridge. And that bridge had depth under it, it had kind of the fog underneath, and it just gave a sense of scale. The other aspect, and that was just in one area, there's multiple areas that had things like that. The other area was that there was a very, I don't remember the exact name of the area in Mir, that was swampy, mushrooms. It had a very strong visual identity. It's what you would think of whenever you thought of a decently high fidelity biome. It had character, it had visual effects, it had atmospheric fog that made it a very strong visual representation of a kind of swampy biome. And then moving forward, we lost some of that with Aaron, We started to get some of it back with Terra, but not to the detail that was needed. And so if I missed kind of the core essence of what people really liked about Mir, put it into chat. Because we've had a lot of discussions over these, and there's other mechanics and things like that, but the two that I keep coming back to with other players and their feedback are both that identity to the biome. There was one area that was particularly strong in the biome that showed you what could be if things were more hand done and not just procedural. And then the other was the sense of scale to make the world feel big. And going forward, we are re-looking at the environment. While we are reusing the RN continent, like the core height map, it will almost look nothing like the world that you see today. We have a very high bar on our environment going forward. We are identifying the biomes. We're testing a new visual direction for art. And all of those different things that you at least saw a taste of in Mir is going to be represented in the new relaunch of what will seem familiar as it shares characteristics of RN, but largely is going to be unrecognizable visually. It's going to be far stronger biomes, presence, points of interest, and some things around how the planet even looks and feels in its world space. We see here Olive, Shadow Veil. Yeah, so Olive put in chat, Shadow Veil was a long distance trek down a gauntlet of undead and goblins to get to the Jewel of the Bone Dragons at the end. The open world dungeons we have now are nothing like that in scale, size, or feeling of reward. Having gotten to a major PvE farming area, the closest might be Frost Boss and Aaron. And then the next comment, Aaron feels like a lot like hills for the sake of hills and making roads longer. We've got to give you a cart and make you run across the world. No, I absolutely agree with you, Olive. From the videos that I've seen, and I can see the content and things like that in the project, but it starts to get at least a taste of what people want out of MMOs, and that's immersion. And the biome should reinforce that immersion. That kind of open dungeon setting has a part in Fractured's future. These are things that Hellcracks, also goes by Matt, as his real name in real life. He and I constantly have discussions around what does instance dungeons look like? What does open world dungeons? What does the rolling landscape of RN look like going forward? And we are still figuring out what biomes make up that identity and doing visual tests on that. Continue on here, and then we'll get to more questions. Well, that's great. This slide did not quite work. Okay. One of the things that I do want to talk about, as it's been a sore subject for quite a while, is actually optimization. And it's, the joke is that that's the one way to stress test your PC. And so ignore the way the character jitters in the animation. It's an older animation controller for the WASD movement that we're beginning to test and implement. But here we've built a test scene in which we build everything in from an environment perspective to begin testing like the optimization. So there's a lot of details that go behind that, and I'll do a video with Andre and Jacopo on more of the details. But here I'm running around like we have this now benchmark that everything going forward, we can better monitor its impact to the PC. One of the great things when testing out in this scene, while it's pretty barren, we know that in the existing Fracture Online, your computer could sound like it's taking off on the login screen. And sundial's confirmed. Yep, it's a big gray sundial. But the scene here gives us a foundation for all assets as we're going through every single model and texture in the game, and looking at what the future looks like from a style perspective. But we're testing each one of those models to understand what optimization needs to happen for that. And I can already say the Unity 6 upgrade with the rendering pipeline and all the work that Andre's been doing around that has already shown quite a bit of improvement. So when running around in the scene, even with uncapped FPS, my computer is not trying to launch itself into space. It is also really hard to measure the current live Fractured Online to this, as some of the tools to measure performance and the tooling to understand draw calls and batching and just various different optimization tooling wasn't available in that version of Unity either. So you would have to build that out, and it wasn't worth the effort. So we've essentially set a foundation going forward that we can monitor whether or not assets and environments need optimization and how much optimization to give you guys the best experience and not to launch your computers into space. So looking at the questions real quick. So one of the last kind of topics that I wanted to quickly cover in today's video, and I'm only going to scratch the surface in this video. We recently just had conversations around what was the best way to begin showing this complex new system around classes, specialties, armor, and weapons. And we landed on, just actually yesterday, that we want to do a very dedicated video in it and put this out. One of the things, Andre and Jacopo are on different time zones, so it makes it hard to have a live stream with everyone on. And we wanted to first walk through everything in detail. So that video is going to come out within the week. We're going to spend the time, we're going to walk through the design in detail, which includes where we are at with the new classes and specialties, all of that. But at its core, the new system is very different than the current Fractured Online kind of open-ended skills. And the way that you acquire those is quite a bit different. So in the current Fractured Online, you acquire skills by going out and killing monsters. Those monsters are limited to only casting the skills that you can learn. And there's a variety of restrictions, like the weapons, as well as the armor, that restricts down your build to take those possibilities and narrow those down. And so the new design that we have for classes and specializations, weapons and armor, is not to just take away optionality. It's to give us a better tools and mechanism to balance these, while also giving players a stronger identity in the role that they can play. So, for example, in this type of setup, we will have a multi-class structure. It's going to make better sense when we walk through. We actually do a lot of our design work when it comes to lists in like Excel, and a bunch of mind maps visually. But when you pick a class like a fighter, that fighter will have specialties that specializations that they can have in there. And so, for example, let me pull it up real quick. So for example, a fighter, and we're still working on the naming, that's always some of the last things, we'll have specializations of warfare, dueling, leadership, marksmanship, shield fighting. And it's that the fighter will have a series of abilities that makes a fighter, you know, a general like combat, up close and ranged combatant. But then you can augment your play style by choosing these specializations, which will augment the skills in the skill trees that you can choose from, and changes how those skills react and the damage they do or the status effects. They just will take it from you know, a shield, you know, like rush, to a shield, rush, and bash that causes a stun. Just as an example, we've got some lined out, but I didn't have it pulled up. there's a lot of these variations that can happen depending on the specializations that you choose for your classes. When you combine that with the armors, and then you combine that with the weapons, we have ran the numbers, and there's, at the moment, there's around 40,000 combinations that can happen. The optionality is still there. And so when you look at whether or not you want to multi-class, let's say a fighter and a mage, for example, and you choose the specializations inside that mage, and you kind of build out, your character to be a battle mage, a mixture of fighter and mage, and you have the optionality between, fighter armor and mage armor. You end up getting some of the stronger identity around what role you play based off of your build than what you had in the previous Fracture Online, which everyone was kind of like, well, until combat started, like, what are you? I can see what armor you have and what weapon you have. Most people ran around in either bows or staffs, so that was even more confusing. And then you had you had to wait till someone cast something to start to understand what they are from a build perspective. In this case, while you have the optionality, you should be able to quickly identify what your opponent is from a high level. So we're going to step into each of these class examples, these armors, these weapons in that video coming up this week. I'm going to check on chat a little bit. Yeah, so it's not just balancing, and it's the ability to have options to choose a play style that you want that can have a stronger identity. For example, I like playing the two-handed sword in the existing Fracture Online setup, and there was not many skills to really support that. It didn't feel like a fighter, like a strong fighter with two-hand sword. There was just a lack of one. There was a lot of things, but not just the skill optionality, but the visual effects, the animations, all of those things we're going through and rebuilding. Being able to bring that to a higher fidelity is something that every studio building an MMO has the same challenge. Like the amount of skills and the fidelity in which you want to have that skill from a visual and feel and movement and balancing perspective costs and takes time. And so to move that up to a modern standard of quality, that does mean that we reduce some as well. And like I said, it wasn't just to reduce and cancel out a bunch of abilities, but it was to make a strong identity that the players can feel like they play that role versus having just everyone's a mix of nearly the same thing. And realistically, everyone ends up picking a couple of the meta builds anyway. So you'll still have plenty of optionality to choose from. It's just going to present itself a little differently. Yep. Someone in chat said, I made a really cool great Axe Tiger Man in beta. It was pretty fun. IMO, just lackluster compared to the crazy magic people could combo together, whilst Axe is stuck with Axe skills. Absolutely, that is melee was absolutely shafted in the previous class and skill design. If you weren't a mage or you weren't bow, it just wasn't it was not as fun. So those details around being able to respec and what classes and the skills and details we'll go through and we'll break it down in detail. As we have the design and we've been trying to break it in the theory sense, and we're very confident that we can put this as a foundation, share it, collect feedback, and begin implementing these big changes. And I will disagree, classes does not have a forced meta. No, it's no different than if you have 1,000 skills, or in Fracture Online's case, 200, your meta still ends up being whatever is most performant. As humans, that's just what we do. In this case, though, there is still a lot of optionality. There will be a mixture of what you can do inside of your build versus making new character. For example, changing your main class and your subclass is not something that will change. You can change, but we are looking at like what underneath, like specializations or weapon proficiencies, and we still haven't nailed that down. But that's something that we can get feedback on as we share those details and those designs. Exactly, Artemis, maybe pronouncing right. I think we already had classes with attributes. Absolutely. Yep, the classes were there, and when they're talked about and designed for, they were actually, they were absolutely there. They just weren't presented in your like standard choose this class, choose that class optionality. Let me grab a few more questions here. There's a question around the last version of the game that they played. It's locked to land from what I remember. Will there be any plans on expanding into the waters for travel content? So this is something that we are actively going through on what does moving away from this new one content design, as we know that there's other places after the fracture in the lore. And we are looking at some interesting ways that I've not seen done in a game before on how you travel between things. So more information to come on that. Hopefully in the next few weeks we can start sharing some of the high level world design, but we still have a few things we want to agree on in the team. Mir did feel less procedurally done. Agreed. For gathering, could you have done it so that each gathering type can effectively be used to spawn rare monsters or even bosses? Could give out notifications to encourage contesting the spawn. Yeah, we're actually redoing all of the way that resources respond to be more area and kind of biome specific. And a biome will be more rich in a particular resource, and there's going to be quite a few major biomes and sub-biomes underneath to support that will spawn relevant resources. There will also be rare resources that can spawn around the world, and there's going to be much more world events, not just like the divine trials, for example, but NPCs will cause events as well, such as caravans moving between towns that could be raided or protected, just various things to make the world feel alive. And some of those will be, you think that you're gathering something nice, it's rare, but it's actually protected. Those are options on the table for us to do. The system is there to support some of these. We just want to expand out on the tooling. Will you be limiting gathering crafting on a character, or is it all obtainable? I guess what I am asking is, are we going to need a ton of alts? The alts will be the investment to play different combinations of things from a high level, right? And we're still nailing down the what we have on a single character versus not. But we largely feel that crafting should be account wide, although that may change. But that we don't feel like that's where the value is. There's no reason to re-level up mining or crafting on that. You've done that once. The value should already be there for you. But the optionality of maybe finding different class mixtures could be where you spend on your alts. The other thing that I haven't really mentioned much on, but the races will play a much stronger part in your build. So when we talk through the class and skills structure in detail, each of the races will have not only their own trees and how they play a part in building a much stronger racial identity, while the goal is that we're launching with humans, and if we can get farther, great, but they have to be tied in. But they'll also have an interaction with primal energy. So when we mentioned that the RPG aspect is going to be a lot stronger this time around, it is going to be part of the interactions for the races as well. Let me check on any more questions. So at the moment, when it comes to advanced races like conversions between Angel, some of the stuff that was in the original Kickstarter and original lore, at the moment that is not on the near-term roadmap. We want the foundation to be very strong. Just to give a little more context, there was Angels, Abomination, Liches. I would say if we're successful on capturing back our player base and new players, and we're thriving in the development, that would be something in the future that we would definitely look at as potentially advanced options around races. But you know, we want to make the core of Fracture Online enjoyable, because just adding Angels and Abominations wouldn't save it in the existing setup. So I think Will, if you're out there, if there's any more questions that maybe I missed. Yeah, so I think the questions have slowed down. What you can look forward to in the next week is one, the beginnings of our public milestones for development, what the goal of those milestones are, and the individual things underneath. Now, there will always be a community versus the internal version to keep things a little bit more concise and understandable. But you should be able to see where we are in development on those milestones. Like I said, that's going to be the best measure for launch until we get a little closer. We've not said anything about classes being money gated. The other thing is a deep dive with Andre around the classes, specializations, armor, and weapons. And those details will be, you know, what do we have at relaunch? What do we see if we can make it, you know, build faster? And maybe we get a few more of these out before the relaunch. What does a specializations mean and do? Skill examples, etc. What does that upgrade path look like? So actually, you brought up a great point in chat. That's not something that we're hiding away from on this, but it was mentioned, and we've seen this, something that could help out the player base is not letting a flood of hackers would be to have a free little tutorial area they can run around in. And a sub fee really deters first-time buyers. You're correct. Like, you know, a sub fee to play is not really the thing anymore. But there is absolutely an issue in the existing Fractured Online that we've seen, that we're looking at. But the part of that migration on the back end that we mentioned, coherence, was that we are moving into better supported tech to prevent vulnerabilities like what you've seen in the tutorial island. We are shutting down the existing Fractured Online. We're still determining that timeline, but we've been open about that. We want to create an event for that so that we can have fun. So I'm going to be working with Jacopo to understand, like, what are the, you know, what are the crazy things that we can do towards the end of that. But yes, there is absolutely some issues in the current Fracture Online from a stability perspective. And developing on that is just not worth it, because the whole back end is changed, and we're actually very far along in that process, much farther than I thought we would be. But you know, the hope would be in the next, you know, couple of months that we could get into testing with players on the new back end with that. Biggest worry about the combat was that CC's made you move around so much in a clunky way, group or earth elementals pushing you constantly. I agree. Anytime you would go in like Terra, the little mountain golems, they would push you around constantly and stun you. And that was always an issue. It was like constant chain CC. This gives us a chance to readdress the like diminishing stuns and CC, things like that. And we do believe that sieges will play a part going forward. It's one of the two structured PvP that we have talked about in the past. An admin laser, they're not far off from that. Okay, yeah, I think we'll go ahead and wrap this up. We respond in Discord. I'll be doing a summary, an article on our website for this. And going forward, we have access to all of our socials, so you'll start to see a better communication for these live streams. And then if there's any questions, hop into Discord, put them in there. I'll continue to answer some of these in chat. But largely, there's a lot of changes, and we're going to keep bringing everyone along and collect feedback during that. Starting this week, you'll see the first deep dive into the biggest part of the redesign for Fractured Online. So, thanks everyone.